NYUJ is a coalition of 13 local and national organizations who are all working together to bring common sense criminal legal reform to New York State. And today's discussion group focuses on reentry, because reentry and bringing people home safely and permanently from New York State incarceration is one of the, if not the most neglected areas of criminal legal reform and criminal legal services in New York State. In fact, New York State has really left reentry to the purview of nonprofit organizations who for 30 and 40 years have worked independently to develop systems that work, to measure systems that work, to implement programs that work. Now it's time for New York State to take up that mantle. Reentry in New York is very much in the same place that homeless services was in New York in 1975. We should have already learned these lessons. We should already know in the government level that coordinated, uniform, universally available, holistic services is the way forward to ensure that communities who are disproportionately impacted by incarceration, particularly Black and brown communities in New York, can be restored after being unfairly targeted by the criminal legal system for so long, but also that comprehensive reentry services yield better results in terms of the use of taxpayer dollars and, of course, to improve public safety by reducing recidivism. Now is the time for New York State to act on implementing uniform, universal, holistic, data-validated reentry services. And that is really the crux of our conversation today. There are dozens of independent organizations, direct service organizations who are doing this work already. What we need New York State to do is to look at their programs, to fund their programs, and to expand their programs so that every single person who is coming home, which is greater than 90% of everybody who's incarcerated in New York State, have the services and supports they need across every dimension of their lives to successfully and permanently reenter. And that means mental health services. That means substance use services. That means employment services, job training services, economic opportunity services, family reunification services. Everything that somebody needs to successfully and permanently reenter New York. We know what works because of the work of all of these nonprofit organizations. Now is the time for the state to implement those services. It's really a delight for me to be able to introduce your moderator today, someone who has worked in this field for years, an internationally renowned advocate for the formerly incarcerated and the currently incarcerated, and the founder and CEO of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, Topeka Sam. Topeka, I'd like to turn this over to you to start this really fascinating, really important conversation.
Thank you so much, Alexander. And thank you everyone for joining here today. Very, very excited as the CEO and founder of the Ladies of Hope Ministries, but also senior advisor to NYUJ since its founding. These conversations are critical, and I'm so excited that we're moving into talking about what is actually missing in New York in reentry. As a woman who is previously incarcerated, having served 3 years in federal prison, I came back home to my home state of New York. And, though we are focusing on New York State incarceration and those re-entering back into society from New York State, there are also a large amount of people who are re-entering back into New York State from federal prisons who are from New York. And when we look at that, we have to make sure that we're providing services, re-entry services, specifically for every single New Yorker, right? Just for an example, when I came home, because I was not incarcerated in a New York State prison system, that no programs were there to help me, which is why I ended up creating the Ladies of Hope Ministries. People said, well, I'm sorry, you were not incarcerated in the state facility, so therefore I could not actually benefit from programs because they were only state funded. And that is ridiculous, because it also happens now. And so when I think about my work being centered specifically on women and girls, and a minimum of 29,792 women and girls are released from New York State jails and prisons each year. That's crazy, right? And to think we have, no housing, we have no access to quality healthcare, we have no access to healthy food, no access to an equitable opportunity in career and employment. The 44,000 barriers that people who are returning from prisons or jails in this country are facing. And then New York, where we would deem to be, the big city of dreams, Which everything in New York ain't always what it seems. And that's coming from a New Yorker. I would just say, there's a lot of work that we still need to do and that we can do. And so I'm excited to be joined by my panelists here today to discuss what's missing in New York's reentry specifically. And so our panelists today are Hannah Liebman Dershowitz, who's the Director of Policy and Advocacy for New Yorkers United for Justice. Welcome and thank you for being here. We have Marvin Mayfield, who is the Director of Organizing for the Center for Community Alternatives. Thank you, Marvin, for being here. And Alexander Hall, who is a small business owner, housing associate at Bard College, and directly impacted by the criminal legal system. Happy that you could join us today as well. And so just to get started, I'd like each of you to just share a little bit about who you are and just briefly about your background and your experiences. Let's start with you, Alexander.
Hey, Topeka, thank you for the intro and forgive me everyone for jumping on here late. So I'm formerly incarcerated. I did 13 years in state prison and came home 2018. Specifically, one of my main struggles coming home was surrounding housing. So I came home to the shelter system because I didn't have an address in New York City. So I was able, only because I had a network of people of people who were with me through my incarceration, who were now like in spaces here that could be helpful. I was able to get connected with the Fortune Society. So I went to the Castle, and which is their transitional housing, and I stayed at the Castle briefly before I was able to kind of get employment, and then I was able to rent a room from a person from basically a family friend. So in that process, I realized that transitional housing is not one size fits all, and it had me shift my focus into thinking about how we can help people coming home. So that's some of the work that I did with the Bard Prison Initiative. I did some work as a housing associate, and I built out that position for them and just learned more about the climate and about really what's lacking. So my job there was to connect people with affordable housing, different forms of affordable housing, and also different forms of transitional housing. Transitional housing is probably the most difficult because it doesn't really exist. And now, there's starting to be a lot of like shelter type systems. So like Exodus has been like a big player in getting people housed. And I actually, with the Center for Community Alternatives, I put in an application to try to do some transitional housing project on my own. The city ultimately denied us funding. So the funding went to most of the big players that already exist in the landscape. And but we were trying to do something a bit different, something kind of I would say similar to what Topeka is doing, right? In that it's a very much more homey sort of a feel and environment rather than an institutional setting. So yes, that's a bit of my background. Other than that, I am an entrepreneur. I have a few businesses surrounding fitness. I own a gym in East Harlem, and I also do some programming in partnership with Center for Community Alternatives. I bring fitness programming into the adolescent facilities, so the adolescent detention centers in the city. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I need to come meet you at that gym in East Harlem. I'm in Harlem today. But I just also want to lift up when you talked about housing specifically, and that your journey with the shelter system. So, just recently, Miss Jean Coxum, who we called Mama Jean, she had spent over 20 years in the New York State prison system. She came home. I'm happy to working at Exodus as their head chef for many, many years. She had an issue with the housing that she was in. And so when we opened, she became our house mom. And she moved in, and she was the first woman in our house, and she had been there and for a few years. And what happened was, there was this idea because in New York State specifically, if you're not considered a shelter, which we are not, right? And purposely, because we are a home, women and men, they have to go into the shelter system in order to be able to have access to vouchers. And in order for them to get their own, affordable housing. And so Ms. Jean was promised in the middle of a pandemic that if she moved into one of these new shelters that were now popping up and opening, that she would be able to get an apartment immediately. And obviously it was time for her to transition to get a place, and she could not access the vouchers being with us. Well, needless to say, we lost her last week. She's no longer with us. She passed away. And the system has failed her. We're waiting on the autopsy to see what happened. There's been, different types of speculation, but it's been incredibly hard for me, and a lot of sisters in this work, because it shows that, putting people in hotel rooms, not giving them supportive services, irrespective of whether you have just come home or you've been home 20 years. When you're not in a position to truly be able to have and make a living that's allowing you to afford housing, and you end up in these systems, you also end up subjected to all of the things that drive you into mental health issues, substance misuse issues, and all of the things. And she did not deserve to die because the system did not want to help a woman who had been home over 20 years successfully. And so I just wanted to add that, since we are talking about housing specifically in the space, and there are people on the call that should be able to really hear the needs of people, right? You do not want to go back into a prison, and that's what the shelter system is. We do not need to design these things just so that a person is able to access opportunity in order to be able to live, right, safely. Shelter systems are not it. And while that has been a Band-Aid and a fix on what's happening, what has happened is it is an unsafe and unhealthy environment for my sisters and brothers who are coming back home. So I needed to say that. I'm glad that you raised that. And I just wanted to just, pause for a few seconds for Ms. Jean. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, Marvin. Can you share a little bit about you and what you do and why?
Hey, great. Can you guys hear me? I think so. Good, great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for allowing me to be here this morning. And I just want to say a personal note to Pika. It's such a great, I have such in awe of the work you do. And it is such an honor to be in this space with you and my other panelists here this morning. So thanks for having me. And my name is Marvin. I am a a native New Yorker, born and raised, Brooklyn, New York, and I'm talking about back in when it was back in the 70s, right? I'm talking about when that's when I grew up in Brooklyn, in Bushwick, in Bed-Stuy, and I was impressionable about that, impressionable about the way we grew up, about the community I lived in, impressionable about the dynamics that were, evident between the residents in my community and the way that our community was policed. Trying to, I don't want to get into the whole reentry thing yet, but I believe I'm supposed to be just doing a basic introduction of who I am. So like I said, I came from Brooklyn and Bushwick. I grew up in those turbulent 70s. And when Bushwick and Brooklyn were, I guess you would call it a slum, not a ghetto. A ghetto would indicate a certain ethnicity that would, dominate that area. Where I was just a slum, and all the things that went with it growing up in that area and in that time. So I watched some of the activists, some of the organizers, some of the leaders coming up during those times, and emulated some of what they saw and what they did, to a point now where I'm into this work, and I've seen the things that are lacking, especially in reentry, and I'd like to get into some of those things more specifically. But suffice to say, I've been working in criminal justice reform and organizing for the past several years, and dealing with reentry and bail reform and all those things that are coming up, things like that. So I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation.
Thank you so much, Marvin. I'm happy to hear you from Brooklyn. I was in Brooklyn the other day. I'm not from Brooklyn, but my parents used to own a Carvel on Eastern Parkway and Utica Avenue for like 20 something years. And anybody who is in Brooklyn from that time, they know or have met my parents. So I like to throw that in every time I hear someone say Brooklyn. But Hannah, can you also now share just a little bit about you, your why, and what is it that you do at NYUJ?
Thank you so much, Topeka. Sure. My name is Hannah, and I am also a New Yorker who grew up in Brooklyn in the 70s and 80s. So we were neighbors, and you know, what a time to grow up here, and it certainly inspired me. And I have been working in prisons and jails since I was in high school, and on criminal legal reform since I became a lawyer more than 23 years ago. I've worked in a lot of states, particularly I worked in Texas in 2000-2001 period, and helped pass a lot of laws that moved Texas from the dark ages to the Middle Ages. And in California, I was very involved in the Los Angeles Reentry Partnership, Regional Reentry Partnership, and really started to understand how the responsibility for reentry needs to be something that the state takes on and owns. And I'm not going to get too much into substance, but I will say we did some focus groups on this issue, and we learned that swing voters in New York want to see the state take that responsibility as well. So in any event, I've been committed to and working on this issue for decades. Happy to be here, and also in awe of the work that Ladies of Hope Ministry and Topeka does. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Y'all are all far too kind. I appreciate you. But it's work that we have to do, fortunately that some of us are doing the work and leading the work in this way, because it should not be a Topeka Sam, it should be many, because they have those opportunities. My reentry has been successful because I had family support, I had mentorship, I had opportunities, I had access, I had a network of previously incarcerated people who shared some of their experiences with me as to the things that they went through, and really helped to guide me on how to avoid them. I had friends, I had attorneys who, when I went to them like, this seems like an injustice, they were like, wait, well, let's fight it. People that understood, like you, Hannah, who've been a lawyer and working in, criminal legal reform for decades, and understand, like, we have to step up and we have to work together because it is necessary. And so, like, when I think about my own reentry journey, Alex, for you, what would you say were your biggest hurdles? I mean, I know you talked a lot about housing, but also now to be a small business owner, can you talk about the experiences that you had to even get here, and some of the most difficult things that you have seen and that are actually still happening and should change here in New York?
Sure. So definitely housing, right? That housing was definitely a struggle. And I'm just going to re-emphasize it because that's something that just still lingers, right? And like people who are coming home all the time. Like I have a big network of I went to the Bar Prison Initiative, so I have a big network there of people coming home who just are having problems, like continual problems with housing. Employment is always difficult, but I think as our network grows, opportunities are becoming more and more available to people, right? As more people come home and are succeeding and are prioritizing, like hiring formerly incarcerated people, I think it's improving, but there's always room for more work to be done in that space. Because if you don't, like you said, if you don't have a solid employment, if you don't have the ability to afford housing, and whatever else that you need in this life, then it's like, where really are you? In terms of personal struggles, I would say that another like undervalued piece of the picture is like mental health support and just support for people. I think a lot of people that I've seen come home are professionally actually in really good shape, right? Like they may be missing, they may not know how to use Google Docs, right? They may not know how to CC somebody on an email, but this is all stuff that you can learn, right? Like people who are coming home, a lot of people who are coming home are like ambitious and ready to work and ready to go, and professionally, but then when it comes to like personally, it's like we struggle with lots of things, and like having missed out on big chunks of adult life in the real world. You have a lot of struggles with like with mental health and with like social skills and social life that I think there could be work done.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, mental health issues and treatment is something that is not really talked about. And, unfortunately, I remember when I came home and I was on federal supervision, I did therapy every single week for years straight. And it was part of a program, like recommendation that I had that I took inside that I need to either do group or I need to do individual. And I know having that individual therapy session, how it was really great for me and where I was, even though I had great support and friends. My friends, when I would complain about some of the injustices that what was happening, they would be like, you should just be happy you're home. Like, what are you complaining for? And I'm like, nah, you don't get it. You have no idea, this is wrong. But being able to talk to a therapist about those things and anxiety and things that I felt every time I would go to see my probation officer was really, really helpful. But also the issue was around that when I wanted to extend it past the year, I was guided that I shouldn't, because if the probation saw that I wanted to continue therapy, that they may not give me an early termination of sentence. And so I had to stop. And I mean, thank God I was able to get other mentorship and support in other ways, but I could only imagine, people who truly needed that additional support every week and how it would have been ripped away just so that they could move out of the system is just something that is really damaging to our community at large. And so I'm glad that you raised that issue.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure.
Just quickly, is that although like you and I seem to come from privileged backgrounds in the sense that we had family support, we had certain support systems in place, but that system still beats you down, right? And you don't realize you can think of yourself as being confident and smart and strong, and that this stuff is not affecting you, but it does. And it comes out in small ways when you come home and you realize, like, wow, I did not value myself in the way that I should value myself, because I've been told for decades that I'm not human, basically, right? So it beats you down. Anyway, excuse me.
No, don't excuse yourself. That was a great point, right? I hear people saying that they've been called inmate such and such. My number was 429999037. I know it like my social security number. And that because you're called that, some people didn't even, when someone called their name, they didn't even know they were talking to them, right? And so that you raise a great point on that we are going through that in reentry while trying to navigate the system, while trying to find employment, while trying to get, continue education, while. And so thank you for definitely raising those points. And I would just add on the housing piece where, New York City still states that no more than 3 unrelated adults can live under one single family dwelling. And we know that law or regulation is antiquated and outdated. When you think about college students, you think about other populations, people who are coming from immigrant communities, and they have to come and you live, together. And I mean, let's be clear, in New York, specifically New York City, many people need to live under one single family dwelling in order to just be able to live somewhere safe, right? Like rent is out of control. And so, I'm uplifting these things because these are things that need to change, right? If you have a 3 or 5 bedroom home, you should be able to have 5 or 6 people in that home, right? It is what it is. And I like to lastly add, because I know you talked about that earlier and then move on to Marvin, You know, when we're looking at trying to get support and give support to our sisters and brothers who are coming home, because we know what we need, we're not trying to create institutions when we have come from that. You know, I know that one of the probation officers who came to look at the house, they were like, well, you should have bunk beds in here. Like, we can't approve this unless you have bunk beds. I'm like, I'm 40 something years old. I don't want to sleep on a bunk bed. Matter of fact, I was an only child and I never slept on a bunk bed until I was only girl, excuse me, and didn't have to sleep on a bunk bed until I was in prison, and I still have a war scar because of it. You know, I'm not going to have, you know, grown people living on bunk beds. Like, I'm just not going to do it. And nor should that be a condition of what housing or approved housing looks like, right? Because you wouldn't do it for yourself. So again, more things that we want to talk about that are moving and harming people, even as it relates to your mental health and your wellness. But Marvin, as a statewide grassroots organizer who has been directly impacted by the justice system, you have special insight into what's needed into communities for people who are returning from incarceration. How is the current state of our reentry system, in your opinion, and what are the biggest unmet needs?
Thanks, Topeka. First of all, to put it this way, you say that was directly impacted. Let me define that. Directly impacted meant that I am formerly incarcerated as well. You know, I went through years of incarceration and degradation, beating down I guess what would you call it, the mental conditioning that incarceration does on a person's mind, on their psyche, on their self-worth, their self-esteem. So a person, number one, before they leave those prison doors, I mean, a person has been has met an onslaught, right, of negative talk, of talk to them, downing them, putting them, categorizing them, labeling them. So a person comes out, number one, right, with a sense of that, you know, they're different from the people who are trying to establish themselves in this society again. So you're dealing with that element, number one, right? And you're coming out, and one of the major things that I think that is important, that is really missing, and it's really, really, really simple, is funding. It's money. Simply put, money, right? Now, in my own experience, and those of many others that I have come across, is that, and I'm talking about the New York State system in particular. When you leave New York State, no matter how long you've been there, I think the state is only required to give you $40 and a bus ticket. $40 and a bus ticket. And for me, this $40 was not even something they gave me, something that was encumbered, accrued, or from my little prison wages or whatever it was, right, for the time when I got ready to leave. And let me put it this way, $40 doesn't get you very far, and a Metro card and a bus ticket doesn't get you very far as well. I remember the day that I left with $40 in a bus ticket and sent to Port Authority. Let me see, by the time I got to Port Authority in New York City, I had $17.35 left, right? $2.50, whatever the train fare was at that time. I had a one-way fare at $17 after serving 5 years of my life, working inside these facilities, busting my ass, sweeping floors and cleaning toilets because they told me that's all you could do because you had a education or a GED. So all we want you to do is work. So we're not going to give you any program. So those are some of the things that are lacking and missing. And when I got out, let me rephrase that. While I was still in, I started to learn things about myself, about history, about the oppression that was been perpetrated against people of color, and most specifically how that relates to incarceration and the prison industrial complex. So I educated myself in that. When I got out, I was fortunate enough to continue my education at NYU prison education program, and that at Columbia justice and education scholar. So I was privileged to be able to continue my education in that area. no way on earth would I have been able to afford those colleges, those schools, if it weren't for those programs. So I'm really grateful for that. But what it also did was it enlightened me. It enlightened me to what was going on around me. And I remember distinctly coming home, not done, getting involved with these programs at NYU and Columbia, and still not having the things that I needed. I didn't have clothes, I didn't have shoes, I didn't have coffee, I didn't have food, simple things like food. And I started getting involved with advocacy and organizing. And I remember distinctly one day, and for those of you who know New York City, we're like in the court areas, we're in Foley Square, and we're having a rally, and we're talking about bail reform and things that are going to help people and decarceration. And I had the opportunity to actually speak. One of the very first opportunities that I had to speak as an organizer, as an activist, and I was doing so good. I'm like, okay, I'm good, good. And after the rally, it was a summertime day, and after the rally, people patted me on the back. Marvin, you did really great. And I was like, good. And I was happy to be able to contribute my story, right, my part, right, and help in any way. But I remember after the rally, it was a hot summer day, and people were dispersing. And I remember lingering around a little while, and I looked across the street and I saw a hot dog vendor and a soda machine, and I didn't have enough money to buy a hot dog for myself that day, or a drink for a soda to quench me. And I'm working in the field. So what I'm saying is that for people who are coming home, who are returning, who want to get into advocacy, into organizing, into this work, we who are here already must be sensitive to their needs. And some of those needs are simply financial needs. You need coffee, you need food, you need this. And a lot of times, they will direct us to social services, to places like that, DSS, Department of Social Services, and get on food stamps or welfare, whatever it is. In my opinion, and from my experience, people who are returning home don't need a handout, they need a hand. We need to get back into working, back into education, back into school. And these are the places where we've been excluded from, mainly because of a stigma of coming home from prison. And a lot of times what we need is just someone to say, okay, here, this is what we're going to supply you with and help you make it along. Now, I know that a lot of people may think that when the first thing I say is money, okay, well, I don't mean to be shallow. I don't mean to say, okay, well, people are money hungry, but there's no way around it. There is no way around that. You come home with nothing, and that's when the stinking thinking starts creeping in. And a person says, you know what, I'm hungry today. My family has not eaten today. I have been excluded from participating in the mainstream because of a conviction record. And at CCA, right, the Center for Community Alternatives, we are working on legislation right now. One of it is called the Clean Slate legislation that would remove barriers from convictions, that people will be able to again, people who are coming home from jails and prisons will be able to access jobs and housing and education that was previously denied to them because of a conviction record. You open up, they do a background check on you, and automatically you're denied, and you are put back in the category of trying to make it for yourself and pull yourself up by these proverbial bootstraps when the system has denied you boots to begin with. How can you pull yourself up with nothing? So what I'm trying to say, and I realize that every person that has been released from jails and prisons, right, has their own responsibility to try to make it the best they can. But if we are denying people inclusion into employment and housing, which are some of the very basic needs that a person needs to succeed, if we're denying them, we are handcuffing them again. Handcuffing them after being released and not being able to succeed. And another one of the things that I believe is a really big impediment to people who are being released and coming home is that New York State has levied these fines and fees against people who are coming home, which is just, it's just so onerous on them. And okay, I remember in particular, my situation, I was coming home. I came home and my parole officer told me that I had to make monthly payments, right? He gave me a booklet, right? And said, if you don't pay these, if you don't pay the supervision fee, you can possibly be violated and go back upstate. I wasn't employed. I didn't have anything. They put this threat over my head, hanging over my head. I was terrified every time I went to report. And I know people who didn't report and got violated because they didn't have that $35 to pay. So I think that one of the most important things that a person needs is funding. I'm not sure where that funding should come from, but I believe that that the state, right, it needs to begin reentry at sentencing. Right, so you start tailoring these programs for persons again toward their needs, and as they get closer to being released, that these programs are in effect for them, so they can transition into them relatively easy upon release.
Thank you so much, Marvin. You said a lot and a lot of impactful information. I love the pull it up by the proverbial bootstraps when they don't even give you boots.
There you go.
I love that a lot, and I might quote you at my next talk. So that
It's all yours.
I appreciate that. But as I'm thinking about what you're saying, and specifically around, making sure that people, when they're released from prison, and there's organizations doing that, we're actually launching a new program at LOHM through UBI, Universal Basic Income. And so this is not a new idea. It's something that has been going on for years. California recently just implemented it. The National Council is doing it also, and some of the states up in Boston. But, for us, we're like, okay, to your point, when a person comes home from prison, they need income, period. Right. And, it should be another basic right after doing a particular time. And no, you don't have to do anything for it either. Right? This is something that you should get because you know that you're coming home and that you're actually going to be in need. We already know the barriers that's going to face. And no matter how much legislation we pass, because I know I've been instrumental in passing many pieces of legislation across the country, you also have to make sure that there's oversight and that what has been passed is actually happening. You have to make sure that people are really, really changing their hearts and minds, right? Because even if a person, you pass legislation and it says you can't discriminate against a person who has a conviction, we can Google everything and see what a person's, all of it is public information. And if you find that, and a lot of people are doing that, you're looking on social media, you're looking up things, and what happens, people see where you have been and they can be biased, just like that. And New York being an at-will employer, you can terminate a person at any time and you don't have to give a reason why. And then it's on you, the onus is on you to prove that you've been discriminated against based on your conviction, and so you can't worry about that when you got to find another job because you might lose your housing and you can't eat and all the things. So I really appreciate all of the points that you made, but universal basic income is something that all people who have been incarcerated should have. They should have it a year before they leave prison so they can begin to save, and then a year upon release from prison. And that should be enough for people to move forward. So again, that's something that LOHM is implementing. Anybody who is interested in knowing more about that, again, just Google UBI, it's out there. There's, I think it's 100 Black mayors, I was told, that are actually taking leadership in that across the country as well. But I think that we should, as organizers, previously incarcerated, we should be able to implement the same type of support to our sisters and brothers in our community because we know exactly what each other needs. So thank you so much. Hannah, the NYUJ Coalition recently introduced the Reset Act, legislation aimed to invest in reentry services in New York State. Tell us about the legislation and why it is needed, please.
Sure, thank you so much, and appreciate all the comments so far. I'm going to go back to what Marvin said. Right now, when people get released from prison in New York, the most they are given is $40 and a bus ticket, and that's the law. Accessing needed services and support isn't easy. We've been hearing about that in the last 40 minutes so far, and these services are not meaningfully available, and they're not like we've been saying, funded by the state. More important, the state isn't taking responsibility, formal responsibility for helping individuals reestablish stability, or sometimes get it for the first time when they're coming out of a period of incarceration. So we know this has never made sense. And the one thing we all agree on and have agreed on for some time is that we don't just have to get people out, we also have to then provide the supports that are needed for people to succeed. And leaving people with untreated illness and untreated traumas and unstable housing and barriers to jobs and on and on and on is not acceptable morally, legally, and that there needs to be an expressed will of the state to address these needs of these people coming back to our communities and keep them home. So the other thing is, of course, any reinvestment in reentry services and treatment, especially if it's targeted to individual needs and if it's at the choice of the individual, will naturally reduce future crimes and arrests, because the research is ample that the more economic stability people have and the more people can thrive in the community and have their needs met, those basic needs that we've been talking about, the more likely they're going to keep doing that. So NYUJ is so proud to have originated this concept of legislating the responsibility to fund and make flourishing a bloom of reentry services across the state. So these reentry services and treatment offered in community, we've shortened to RESET. So the Reentry Services and Treatment RESET Act will provide wraparound services, including behavioral health treatment, ensuring that all citizens receive trauma-informed care. So we are extremely excited to announce that the RESET bill, the RESET Act, was filed this session by Senator Jamal Bailey, and it's called Senate Bill 8528. I'm going to repeat that, 8528. This is a first chance for the state to go from that $40 in a bus ticket, paltry, unacceptable system toward a full ecosystem of holistic services and treatment on demand for all returning community members. And by the way, we wrote the legislation, Topeka, broadly enough to encompass people coming back from a period of incarceration in federal prison as well to communities in New York State. So the RESET Act, as filed, Senate Bill 8528, provides for an initial $500 million of investment in reentry services and treatment and annual reinvestment. And it will likely pay for itself many times over, as we know, because we know how much less expensive it is to provide communities with services and treatment that they need, and instead of using incarceration as the first resort. In other words, what Topeka was talking about earlier, getting the help shouldn't be part of the system. It should be something that you access separately from the system that is supported and funded. The bill also will study the effects of this infusion of money and what additional services are delivered, what the uptake is, what people are needing and wanting and accessing, and measure the relevant community health and safety outcomes. So that means essentially, let's show how caring for people's needs works better than putting them in carceral setting. We can show that if we do it, but in this country, we've really had a system where we sort of start making the reforms, but we don't follow through with the support and the systems that are needed to keep it going and demonstrate the successes. So that study part is really important in the bill. It also includes a clause that makes sure that none of the funding is supplanting other funding, so that it's all new funding for additional and added services in the community for the care infrastructure that we need, and also a requirement for adding training on trauma-informed practices for criminal legal professionals. And so again, Senate Bill 8528, the RESET Act, is an important first step toward building a real system of reentry in New York and providing a model for a care-forward public safety agenda. NYUJ is thrilled that Senator Bailey will champion this, and we hope all of you on this Zoom will support the bill next session when it starts to move. And we're just really excited to get that out there, and we hope that you'll all support us.
Thank you so much, Anna.
I'm happy to answer any questions too about anything in the bill.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I really, really appreciate that. I know we have only a few more minutes left. So if anybody have any questions for any of the panelists, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A. I want to give anyone any opportunity to ask any questions that they would like to ask while we're closing out. But I also want to give the panelists, a kind of a last thought of the things that we've shared today, what you would like to leave those who are tuned in with. And how can people get in contact with you if they want to learn more about the work that you're doing and how they can support you? And also, how can you work with them in some of the work that they're doing to help to guide and also advise on what is needed in reentry? So anyone can start.
Okay, I think I'd just like to jump out there. I think one thing we need to take into consideration is that when a person finds himself in the unenviable position of beginning a period of incarceration, during that time, there's a lot of things that a person goes through. There's a lot of trauma, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of talk, a lot of fear. No one comes out of prison the same way they went in. There's always trauma that a person deals with going through that same situation. Reentry for, I think, Alexander said it early on, for over 90-something% of the people who go into will be returning home. So reentry is a vital step of the whole process of what would you call it? Recovery, incarceration, rehabilitation. So we cannot ignore that portion of it. People can't just be released out and released from jail with nothing, $40 on a bus ticket, and say, make your way, pull yourself up by the proverbial bootstraps, right? And have no boots to pull up. We need to provide these things for these people. The situation of permanent exclusion in New York City housing must be eliminated and reversed. We have people, I know people in my community, young men and women, who have come home from doing time, come home from jails and prisons and can't get an apartment, sleeping on their parents' couch year after year at 30, 40 years old. I mean, come on. This is something that really needs to be addressed, and we have to do better by providing for people who are coming home.
Thank you, Marvin. And that leads to a point when you said that. I'm laughing because, thank God I had a room. It wasn't the couch. But I was released from prison. I was 39 and I went to live back with my parents. And again, thank God that I was able to, go back to a safe place to live. But I had lived with my parents since I was 18 years old before I went to college, right? And so it was it was something. But my point was, when people are coming home from prison, we're not looked at as homeless. We are not in a homeless category, right? But you are. If you don't own your own home or under lease in your own dwelling, you are homeless.
You said it.
And so it should not be that automatically I have to go live in a shelter in order to be provided with those opportunities. That if there is housing and other opportunities in a community-based organizations or others who are willing to open their home to help a person with, to your point, a hand, right? Then the person should also be able to benefit from those services. So thank you for that point yet again. There are two questions that are in the chat. I just want to go over. One is, what is the status of the New York State Reentry Council, which was set up many years ago? I don't know. I don't know if anybody else. I guess I would say that's the state of the council. I'm not sure. I know COVID hit, and I know they were doing stuff before then and also appointing new people, and then things kind of stopped. Does anybody else know any information about the New York State Reentry Council on the call?
A tiny bit. I know that when we have been in contact with a lot of providers upstate and other places in the state, we have spoken with people who serve on these reentry councils, and they have reported to us that they're just, it's not a fulsome system to provide reentry. It's sort of more advisory and doesn't really, I'm sure that they serve some functions and that they're important, but they're not creating the system that we need, and really able to make change or address things because they're not funded and they're not given those resources to really implement stuff.
So
And Topeka, can I just bring up one thing before we end? I know we have just a couple of minutes, and I just want to say, with the Department of Corrections, and community supervision, whatever they call themselves now, it needs to take a greater responsibility, a greater stance in getting people prepared for when they leave, and have services in place when they leave. Like one of the things that they make sure that they do when a person gets incarcerated and you get your conviction number and you get sent upstate and put on those greens and those boots, whatever it is, one of the first things they do is they send you to program committee. The program committee is where they give you a jailhouse job or something, or what you're going to do while you're there. They're making sure that their environment, the prison environment, is well run and taken care of, and everybody has a purpose and a job and a place to do that. But when they get released, they're just pretty much just, okay, well, now you're on your own. We don't have that program committee in place. We don't have a specific direction for you that you need. The Department of Corrections and Community Supervision needs to increase that objective in making sure that people have a direction for employment or something to do with their time when they get released, rather than just here, go report to your PO.
great, another great point, Marvin. Thank you.
Can I add to that, Topeka? If you don't mind?
Absolutely, yes, please.
So I agree. I agree very much with Marvin in the sense that that docs needs to do more. But I also fear allowing docs to do more, right? Because I remember what program committee was like, and I didn't get what I wanted when I went to program committee ever, right? So,
Me either.
so like, I think the like larger point here is like that reentry needs to look more varied, right? Reentry is institutionalized just like prison is, right? So a lot of these reentry organizations look exactly the same, offer exactly the same services, and always assume a problem, right? They assume like a pathology that needs to be fixed, right? And that's problematic, because a lot of people are coming home and don't have drug problems. They don't have anger management issues, right? We've dealt with those things for however many years we were in prison. And when you come home, sometimes you just need enough support to get going and to get started, right? Other people need a lot more support. For other people, institutional environments are necessary, right? But the point is that, like, don't assume one thing applies to everyone. And I think that's what we can all do, like collectively in reentry. And the other thing is to think about like ownership and to think about leveraging our networks in that process, right? Like the more that we as a community are able to put people in position and able to help people through their own kind of journeys and processes, the less we have to rely on institutions. So like I'm always very big on us, like on empowerment for directly impacted people, and like, a small example of this is like I have two friends of mine who started a vending machine business out of my gym, right? And they're formerly incarcerated, right? It's a small thing. I don't have to do anything to do that, but I've given them a space to do it, right? And it's like we need more like availability for people to have spaces to be able to do things for work, for self-improvement, and for all of the rest of the things that come with reentry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alexander, for that. There's one other question I'm going to get to. I mean, we're over now, so it's fine. We might as well just keep going. The last question in the chat is, are you seeing any real help on the ground for formerly incarcerated persons in terms of certificates of rehabilitation or good conduct, ban the box and limited ceiling expungement to help with employment, housing, and other discrimination? Or is it just a drop in a bucket, not well known? So I would say that, if I can be honest and frank, that I would say it is known, but I would say it's just a drop in the bucket. And I say that because, again, it is about the biases of people who are in these positions to either employ, except for housing and or others. If you have an expungement, then obviously, it doesn't come up when a person is doing a background check. In some instances, I know in New York State specifically, things are sealed. And so there are still people in different agencies that actually still have access to that. And again, even if you have it sealed, I mean, I have a full presidential pardon and there's still discriminatory practices.
That's right.
Right.
That's
So, it's because people have their own personal biases on what they think about people who have had convictions. It's that kind of adage, once a criminal, always a criminal. And so this is the way people think. And you just have to be honest and you have to understand that. I would lean more on the era of, again, the same thing Alexander said, if there are opportunities to provide resources, to provide new opportunities to open up for people who are coming home from prison, that we do that, right? You have to take that autonomy to yourself and that also within the network of friends, other organizations, corporations that you work with to say, hey, I'm involved in this, you should get involved in this too. And so while they are these Band-Aids and these other things that have, again, people who are in reentry jumping through hoops to get these documents to give to people who then also say, well, no, you have a certificate. They still want to know what you did.
That's right.
They still want to know what landed you there.
That's
and
right.
so I don't think that that necessarily is helpful. That is my opinion. Look, my opinions are my own. But as a person who has been through this process, and it is always ongoing, no matter how long you've been home, because of the traumas that we all have experienced that led us there and that while we were there. And the new traumas that we experience in reentry because of all the barriers and discrimination that we have to overcome, I think that it is critical that we are really, really supporting each other in this. We are elevating and investing in organizations that are focusing on reentry. And lastly, what I would say is that in order for a person to be able to truly be able to transform their lives, they need to have their basic human rights met. That is safe and affordable housing. That is access to healthy food. That's an equitable opportunity in a job, career development, in a growth-focused opportunity, in a decision-making role, in an organization or corporation that they can be proud of, and access to quality healthcare. All of those should be basic human rights for every single person in this country. New Yorkers want the same. New Yorkers in reentry want the same. And so while we're looking at that, it is critical that we're passing this legislation. But also reentry direct service is also advocacy. Reentry and direct service is also racial justice. All of the coin and these terms that are being used, we need to understand that when a person has their basic human rights met, we then are able to change what's happening in our community, in our society, period. And so, that's my last bit. If anybody has any additional words, please, of course, Marvin.
I'm just going to briefly say that, direct services, there's no more direct services than reaching out your hand to a brother or sister who needs that help. And that is the best way that we can provide reentry services for one another.
Okay, you kept it short and sweet. All right, well, that will conclude. That concludes our webinar for today. What's missing in New York's reentry? We see what's missing, and we didn't even really scratch the surface of this. But please, go on NYUJ social media platforms. If you want to share this video with other organizations,